Hi, and welcome to Reverse Shot. Now, in television news, a reverse shot is when you take one camera, you've pointed it at your interview subject, and at the end of the interview, you turn it around and put it on the reporter so you can get a shot of them nodding or jotting notes. So when you edit two sound bites at the end, it looks like one continuous action. That's what this show is. We're going to turn the camera around, take a look at reporting and reporting techniques, highlight the good and the bad, and let you know what's going on in the world of journalism. Everyone, whether you're on the right or the left, believes there's something wrong with journalism. Now, if you're on the right, you feel like it's tilted left. If you're on the left, you're pretty sure it's tilted to the right. And let me tell you something, folks, after 40 years in the business, I'm telling you, it's tilted towards money. And there's a way that it got there. And we're going to explore that over the next few weeks as we take a look at the problems of journalism. But for now, I want you to look at it this way. We hope to give you the tools so you can critically decide, use critical thinking to decide what is good, what is bad, what is a vetted fact, and what isn't. The simple fact of the matter is, you want to tell us what's going on, you want to describe what's going on, but you don't have to ascribe feelings or thoughts to it. You are there to provide vetted factual information. And that's the toughest thing to do in this day and age. Everyone has an opinion. I've had reporters when I've mentored reporters who've come up to me and said, Brian, this is what I think. And I say, I don't care what you think. I barely care what I think. What do you know? 40 years in this business, and I have worked at large newspapers, magazines, online, on television, streaming services, radio, every place you can produce content, editorial content, I've worked at, and I can tell you it's getting worse. It is, and there's a reason why. But before we go into the reason why, let's take a look and talk to someone who knows how it used to be and how it has changed. And I'm talking about one of my mentors, and I'm happy to bring to this first program a very good friend, Sam Donaldson. Hi, and welcome to Reverse Shot. I'm your host, Brian Karem, and with me, it's our first show, by the way. So I want to thank one of my greatest mentors and a good friend to the show, Sam Donaldson, formerly of ABC, and the guy that I've been told at least in emulate, I can scream as good as Sam, but not as maybe the context isn't as good. But Sam,
well,
thanks.
Brian, I'm glad to join you, particularly because I remember during the Trump years, his presidency, watching and to some extent wishing I were there. But you were there, Jim Acosta was there, April. I mean, a whole number of great reporters trying desperately to get Donald J. Trump to actually tell the truth, at least say something that made sense. And you may not have always succeeded, but you tried. And that was the important thing.
Yeah, the success rate wasn't that good. I don't know if it was us or him. Maybe it was both. But it was tough.
It takes two to tango.
Yep. But the reason why I asked you here is it was during the Reagan years when I first went there, and there was just such a difference between the White House press corps. To me, it seems like a difference between the White House press corps then and now. And I was taken back by something that it was Carl Sagan who said that as our culture has progressed, we look at science almost as if it's today. It's and information as if everything is malleable, and that we live in two different worlds, and that the centralization of the press has kind of destroyed the idea of gathering factual information. Do you agree with that? Do you think that we've changed, that the press has changed over the last, say, 40, 50 years?
Well, I'd like to think that the press hasn't changed in the initial purpose for being, which is to find out something about an event or someone, something of public interest, see if we couldn't find out the facts, and often we failed. And when we failed, then we'd have to correct the record and what have you. But present the information to the general public of print, television, radio, whatever the way, now the internet to an extent. And then the public should make up its mind what it wants to do with it. It's not for me to say, look, I've discovered that the charge that the moon is made of green cheese is not true, because I've consulted the astronauts who were there. They never saw any green cheese. I mean, in other words, I can go through a whole bunch of evidence and say, you can decide what you want to decide, but the evidence seems to show that that's wrong. Now, it's thought of a silly thing, but if you think about it, That's what the press has always tried to do. Go back to the days of the printing press, go back to the days of the Egyptians and their press, such as it was. And today, I think the good reporters, the good news organizations are trying to do that. The general public has changed. The mores, the principles, to some extent, people who understand what our founding fathers did with that Constitution and why it probably makes the great sense, and we should try to continue it. And the press has been marginalized to some extent, by the extent that on the internet, everyone's a reporter. Everyone will tell you there was no Holocaust. Look at this. Alex Jones can say those kids at Stony Brook, they weren't killed. They were government plants. Of course, he paid for it and will pay for it in the case that the people who sued him for that falsehood won in court. But I want the First Amendment changed to some extent so that if someone knowingly knows that he's lying or she's lying to the audience, and the lie is not just some vacuous thing, it doesn't matter, but in fact injures people, I want that person to go to jail once he or she has been properly indicted and, of course, has a fair trial.
Yeah, that's, I mean, to that point, we've been criticized for putting liars on and allowing them to lie and not checking them on their lies. And that is not how it was when I first started. To that extent, I agree with you, but I also wonder if that's the dumbing down of America or the problem in the press today. Well,
if we're going to find the facts on something that the public is interested in, or we think ought to at least know about, we've got to present them. When Mr. Trump was I knew him, a lot of reporters, even though I was based in Washington, knew him over the years. I did a long interview with him when he was hailing as a businessman in 1990. So I understood who he was, and I understood what he stood for. And when he was elected, people would say to me in the press, well, what should we say about him? And I said, well, in my view, you should just call him a liar. You just simply say, he said this, the moon is made of green cheese, and here are the facts, and leave it to the audience. I've changed my mind to some extent. I don't think we should call names. I don't think it's our job to sit there and say, liar, liar, liar.
Right.
But it is our job to be very forceful in presenting information that is correct, which clearly shows that the information that he's dispensing is incorrect. And I'm talking factually now, not an argument over how much taxes we should collect or what have you. The kinds of arguments that I used to cover in the Senate and the House 1960s when I was a congressional correspondent. I loved to watch the arguments, and people of goodwill on both sides or all sides would argue. Then they'd vote, and whoever had the most votes won, and that was it. And that's another thing that changed, isn't it?
Yes.
Who won didn't win because I say so with no evidence.
Right.
I don't know how to deal with that, Brian. Do you have a solution?
I'm searching for the solution there myself. I mean, what I find is that it's almost damn near impossible to convince someone who believes that Donald Trump is a savior that the facts exist otherwise. So I present the facts, and then I point out, as you said, here are the facts. Now you get accused of being, and I've been accused of being left wing, right wing. I'm a
communist sympathizer, not just a Democrat.
Yeah,
of course, Mr. Trump says all Democrats are enemies of the country, right? Not just some, not just this one, all
of them.
And that's a preposterous statement on the face of it.
Yeah, and so it's hard to me. But I think part of the problem in the press, and man, correct me if I'm wrong, but when I first, I remember walking into that White House briefing room, and I kept my mouth shut for a while because I was young. Over the years, and I know you remember this, it was 1983, November, the day after, there was this news program. It was a movie, and then there was a news program afterwards that Ted Koppel moderated. It was about nuclear war, during which
after that show, the Secretary of State, who was George Shultz at that time, had to go on and try to lessen the fear that show was going to be reality. Go ahead.
Remember that. And so we all grew up with the idea, or knew from that moment on, that Nuclear winter was coined. Carl Sagan coined that term during the news program that went afterwards. He talked about imagine two enemies in a room full of gasoline, one with 7,000 matches, one with 9,000 matches. We knew that a nuclear war was not only unwinnable, but, there was a mutually assured destruction strategy of both nations, Russia and the United States. Today, I see news pieces on the internet about how to survive a nuclear war and the best states to live in. And it seems like this dumbing down or this lessening of knowledge and science. I remember it was T.K. Jones who was refuted. He was the Undersecretary of War during the Reagan administration. And there was a book that was written called Reagan and Nuclear War, and it was with enough shovels. And he had tried to argue that if you just have shovels and dig a hole in the backyard and throw a door over it, you'll be fine. With enough shovels, we're all going to win. And we all kind of knew it was BS then, but I see this return to the idea that nuclear war is winnable, that in some, and that frightens me and I look and wonder, is there a dumbing down of America? Is there a lessening of science and a lessening of communication among us? I know that you believe that it's the internet that, allows anybody to be an expert, and that's true. I mean, I can't tell you the number of people that will sit there and go, well, I saw a YouTube video, so I know now exactly what's going on. But does that concern you? At the end of the day, are you concerned with this?
Well, I think people in 1960, people were building bomb shelters because of the fear of nuclear war with the Soviet Union. It's ever since Harry Truman made the only decision that a president of the United States could make. Now, history may show that it was a decision that led us in the wrong direction as a people, as a planet, but no president could have refused to drop that bomb on Japan and end the war and save lives at that moment. Since that moment, this fear has been there. Now, more nations have the atomic weapon. Certainly our so-called adversaries, Russia, China, Xi Jinping. And I noticed that the defense minister of Britain 3 days ago simply said publicly, if we are threatened, I have no compunction about using the atomic weapon to defend ourselves. And Israel has had the atomic weapon since the early 1960s. It maintains it doesn't, or it won't answer the question, but everyone, I'm acting Trump-like. Everybody knows it. One of the things that just makes me so angry when Donald Trump says, well, everyone knows that.
And it's usually a bullshit.
You don't know it. Yeah, right. Anyway, so what happens now? I think first, for a long time, I thought recently the most dangerous spot was Ukraine and the confrontation with Russia, and the fact that now we are allowing the Ukrainians to use our weapons within Russia.
Yes.
It's the kind of step that you go, talking about who's going to use atomic weapons first. Now I believe Israel and that situation is the most dangerous at the moment. Israel is so pressed by the world community.
Yes.
By the world community, including the United States, to stop what it's doing in Gaza and with the Palestinians, that it's now considering going to war against one of its other main enemies, Hezbollah, backed by Iran. And if Israel gets behind the 8 ball, I'm mixing all these metaphors, what's it going to do to save itself? If the United States is abandoning its absolute dedication to whatever Israel wants to do is okay with the United States, and we have abandoned it now to a large extent, Israel will feel no compunction about saving herself now if she has to use an atomic weapon. I'm not saying I think she's going to be the first one.
Right, but
I'm simply saying it's a dangerous situation.
Yeah, it's like we've forgotten our past. It's like, don't we get it? Do we need to run that movie again and show everybody what happens in a nuclear war? Because it's frightening to me that we seem to have lost knowledge, that we don't seem to understand atomic weapons bad.
We've lost knowledge. Another frightening thing is the number of Americans who are abandoning science. Now, scientists aren't always right. Science changes as it discovers new things about the universe or a problem. But basically, the people like Anthony Fauci, a
Yes.
dedicated public service of the first order. And what's happening to him by these know-nothing ignoramuses who accuse him of being the problem during the COVID scare and want him prosecuted and worse. I mean, here's Bobby Kennedy's son. I knew Bobby Kennedy, Robert Kennedy. I've not met his son, who rejects vaccines. Vaccines have saved billions of people. Your baby's being vaccinated. You have the polio vaccine, all vaccines. What's wrong with him? He says he had a worm in his head. I believe him.
It had a lot of room. It was kind of empty
He's not
inside
the only
there.
one. People are abandoning the people who are experts in almost any field. This group of Americans who feels liberated now, they would never run down the street yelling the F word.
Yes.
They wanted to, but they knew society wouldn't. Now it's okay. Donald Trump goes on the stump, as he did in Phoenix just the night before last, and he feels free to be vulgar, feels free to say anything he wants, feels free to say once again that if he's elected, he'll go after his political enemies. He'll go after them. He'll continue to argue that they're wrong the American way. He'll prosecute them. And who does that resemble?
Yeah, I know who that resembles. It resembles Hitler. Again, we've forgotten our
I
past.
didn't want to say the word. I'm so pure.
But to your point, I mean, yeah, what frightens me is that it's like science we're descending into like a technological Middle Ages. We don't respect science. It's like mysticism. Not enough people understand science, and not enough people understand or remember or even are cognizant of our own history. And so you have, I had a critic, like I said, I've been accused of being everything, but a Satan worshiper recently because I don't recognize that Donald Trump is Jesus incarnate, and that Donald Trump is, was convicted like Jesus and let's see, crucified like Jesus. He hasn't been hung on any cross. He hadn't even gone to prison, but that he's like Jesus. And then he's like Washington because both were convicted felons. Washington was never a convicted felon. That was, and he was seditious against the crown, but that's not the same as being convicted of grifting, which is what Donald Trump was convicted of. So all that being said, it frightens me that I don't know if our profession does enough, or if it's just that it's so overwhelming. To me, it seems overwhelming. It seems like you can't do enough on any given day as a reporter to impart information to people who simply just don't want to hear it.
Yes, you can't break through. If you're talking to people, I think most of the people who watched the evening news 50 years ago, 40 years ago, in that period, came away at least weighing in their minds what was presented to them as evidence of this or that or what have you, rather than rejecting it. Because the people who want to reject evidence aren't watching now. So they are not listening now. They're watching and listening only to those people who tell them things that are not true. But
yeah,
they don't know that.
Well, things that they believe inside their own information, they're siloed off. Stuff.
We have a number of Americans in this country who are uneducated. Every country does, but we have a proportionate larger number of Americans who are basic education. I'm not talking about PhD degrees. I'm talking about basic of what democracy is all about. A basic education of science, basic education of language. I mean, you don't have to know 7 languages like our late Secretary of State. She said she knew 7 languages,
yeah,
including Farsi. Anyway, to break through, I think, by this November, with a sizable number of people who now support Donald J. Trump is going to be impossible. I'm not saying we shouldn't try, but
right.
We must concentrate. I'm not active anymore, as you know.
Yeah, thanks.
Concentrate on bringing information to people who are still either A, they haven't made up their mind yet for reasons, but they're willing to listen to all arguments, or B, they've never paid any attention to politics, except they do vote to some extent on election day. It's election day coming? Well, who's running? I mean, that sounds ridiculous, but I can show 5 elections in my lifetime that have been decided at the last minute when those people and there were larger numbers in those days in percentage-wise, decide they'll go vote. Well, they're going to vote on November 5th. And it's one of the reasons why I'm more and more in the belief that assuming Mr. Biden is still ambulatory, still hasn't collapsed in some, and assuming, of course, he's the nominee of the party.
Yes.
And that Mr. Trump is his opponent, I think Trump will be beaten. I believe it because I think the majority of Americans are not the people who believe he was sent by God to save them from the blacks, from the Mexicans, from the Jews, from all the other prejudices that those people felt they couldn't really express because they understood it was antisocial to the extent that they'd be hurt by it. But now he's given them license to do it. There are good people on both sides in Charlottesville. Oh, really?
Well, as we close here today, let me ask you this. What would you like to do if you had a magic wand, could wave it? What would you like to do to change our business? And what would you do to change the electorate? I give you unlimited freedom to do it.
I can't change human nature, and I can't change the minds of people. I can't say to you, well, the people who follow Donald J. Trump, I'd have their eyes opened up to evidence that maybe he's wrong. In fact, he is wrong on things.
Yeah.
But I don't have the power to do that. I think we can't reach them, certainly not in a limited time between now and the 5th of November. He's already decided, as his playbook in 2020 showed us, that if he somehow is legitimately beaten, he'll claim it was fraud. And he will urge his people to protest, not just wait to a January 6th, but stop it. It will be a civil war of sorts without Grant Lee, without the great armies. But it could be violence in the streets. Again, I hope I'm wrong about that, and I'm not predicting widespread violence. But
no, we're already pretty violent.
Do anything, but what can I do for the news business?
Yes.
I'm hidebound. Old people are. I like what I described earlier on was our mission. I would simply reinforce with reporters. I wouldn't have a litmus test to become a reporter. I wouldn't, but I wouldn't say the government should offer any sort of degree or card. But I would hope that bright young people, and I know several of them who are getting into our business. They're bright, They're young, they don't do it the right way. They continue to do the job. Find out the facts on any given event, on any given person, on any given thing that the public is and ought to be interested in, and present it to the public forcefully. And those who say, well, they're not facts at all, push back against that. Say, well, what's your evidence? You don't like mine? What's yours?
And I'll report it.
How many judges were there? 30, 40, 50 judges after the 2020 election, which rejected the suits that should have been fraud.
It was 60.
Mr. Trump had won. Some huge number nominated by both Republican and Democratic presidents on the bench, not just Aileen Cannon. I've never met that lovely lady from Florida who has prevented in every way possible that a judge could, even to the extent that the Fifth Circuit, which is now not the bastion for civil rights it was when I was growing up, but a very conservative circuit, had to slap her down. And she makes no bones about it. It's all for Trump.
Yeah.
No, these judges were all for justice, and there's no evidence. How can you persuade people who won't watch someone and listen to someone who says, here's the evidence that shows X is X and not Y? I return to where we started. I don't know how to do that.
I don't. Yeah. God bless you. I don't either. Well, listen, thanks for joining us, Sam. I really appreciate it. Anytime, you're always welcome to come back. I love just having a conversation.
You're a good guy. I think I could be wrong. If someone presents me evidence, right. Have a good day, my son.
You too, brother. Take care. This is Reverse Shot. We want to thank you for joining us. We'll be right back. We want to thank our good friend Sam Donaldson for joining us today. Our first ever show, Reverse Shot, where each week we're going to take a look at the foibles of the media, turn them back around and see what can we do better and what's been done wrong. So I want to thank you for joining us. We will catch you next time.